welcome to the FASA Leadership Lounge. I am Michelle White, Executive Director of the Florida Association of School Administrators.
And I'm Jessica Janasiewicz. I serve as the lobbyist for FASA and a number of school districts here in Florida.
Well, we are so excited for our second episode, Jess,
Mhm.
as we get through this 2025 legislative session. Of course, our goal with the FASA Leadership Lounge is really to recap some of the policies that are moving through the legislative process. We'll make sure to focus, of course, on education policy and a few other bills that may have the attention of our legislators. And then also find places where that school leadership and policy overlap, especially as we move forward. So, last week was super busy during
Mm.
session. Week two, Jessica, give us a quick overview of what's been going on.
Absolutely. So, both the Senate deregulation bill and the school start time bill were heard in their second committees last week. Both of those bills have one committee remaining. We think that'll probably happen this week. Those bills have been really going through the Senate quite quickly. The House version of the school start time bill has not been heard yet, but it does have just 2 committees of reference, so it's not in real trouble just yet. Now there is no, companion bill for the Senate dereg bill. Normally, that would be a big problem, and we would say, "Okay, well, probably going nowhere," but because this administrative efficiencies bill is a priority for the Senate president, that gives it a little more life than perhaps it would normally have if it did not have a House companion. So we'll look to see where some of these deregulation topics may end up in the House as we move through the process.
For sure. And I know that FASA has certainly supported that administrative efficiencies
Mhm.
bill and is really hoping to see some of that language move forward. We have worked with Senator Simon and others on making sure that that language would be really great for our schools.
Mhm.
So, something else that we want to talk about that happened or moved a little bit last week is Senate Bill 1470 on school safety, and really, the main thing there is that it's clarifying around the language around locked doors and gates, and only the secured times of supervision,
Mhm.
which really means not every moment that a student is on campus, but we do expect some districts to have some flexibility to determine what those hours of supervision will be before and after school. So districts may look at maybe 30 minutes before and after, and then those doors and gates will have to be locked appropriately, but give us some extra flexibility around extracurricular activities.
Mhm.
The Senate, in particular, of course, is working closely with our Florida School Safety Specialists Association. And so I'm really trying to clarify that language from last year.
It'll be very helpful, I think, for our school districts to have that clarifying language. There's been a little confusion since the bill was passed last year. So I think that hopefully will be helpful. We had some other bills move and get some attention that we wanted to mention. The first, House Bill 949, essentially would restrict cell phone use on campus all the time with no real exceptions. So we had had some language from years past in statute where there would be some flexibility if the teacher wanted to have the students use their devices for instructional purposes. This would essentially eliminate all of that. It is important to note, though, with that bill, there is no Senate companion for that bill. So doesn't seem to be the interest in the Senate as much, but there's a lot of time left. So we'll keep our eyes on that. And then the bill that would designate the Gulf of America following the federal change. Was heard in its first House committee this week, and it is important to note this bill would require state agencies to make changes to all of their documents and publications. And then, for our purposes, school districts, there was concern at the beginning that there was no real time frame, and it would seem like that had to be done immediately. And of course, we know we're on a 5-year adoption cycle, so we purchase our books in following that routine. And if we had to stop and get new materials right now, that would really throw us off our cycle and cost money. They did clarify in the language that the updates would just have to happen when the adoptions occur. So the next time you purchase materials, more than likely we're talking social studies materials, but theoretically maybe in some of your ELA books you would have some reference or something. It's just when you adopt that the next time that change would have to occur.
I'm sure both educators and publishers will be excited about
Yes,
that.
yes, exactly.
Um, so there were also some amendments to the hazardous walking conditions bill that we talked about during our last episode. And really minor amendments that will be less onerous for school districts and not create this huge budget deficit. And so, of course, there was a lot of passionate discussion around students that were being hit by cars as they're trying to walk to school and they're within the 2 miles. Of course, we always want to protect our students and try to
Mhm.
find ways that we can make those adjustments. But there has been some really meaningful discussion around that this year as well.
Absolutely, and moving on both sides, so
Mhm.
that's important to note too.
Yeah.
We've also been hearing a lot of discussion around our family empowerment scholarships, both from a budgetary perspective and then also from a policy perspective. One set of bills that has been moving in both the House and the Senate would essentially require private schools, before they enroll a student who's on a scholarship, to inform the parents of what services and therapies, things like that, that are offered at their school. The idea is if the student was at a traditional public school and and had an IEP and was receiving whatever services, they they want the parents to know if those services are offered at the private school or not, because obviously legally private schools do not have to offer those types of things. And the idea is we wouldn't want a parent to enroll their student and then to find out down the road that they're not getting the services because they aren't offered there. So that's been moving on both sides. And then there has been discussion too about what changes need to be made to ensure that when a student is moving to the various choice options, that the money really is following the student. We've seen some instances where there seems to be a bit of a lag. Um, and so a student may start out, let's say, at a private school and then move to a traditional public school and then maybe move somewhere else. And we need to ensure that those students, the money really is following those students. So we expect to see that language probably around budget time. It'll be a budget bill. So we don't have anything yet, but we expect to see that.
Yeah, so more to come on that for
Mhm.
sure. The other thing that we need to keep in mind, and as someone, if someone was looking at all of the bills that we're tracking, sometimes they're not directly related to education, but they do have an impact to our school districts as really the largest employer in probably just about any county that you go
Yep,
to.
that's right.
And so when we look, the House and the Senate both have bills relating to minimum wage requirements and as it relates to internships or apprenticeships. And really, the thought seems to be behind those is allowing these workers to come in to specialized fields, gain experience where the employer may not be able to offer minimum wage for an internship or an apprenticeship,
Mhm.
but the employee is willing to forego that requirement. And so, really trying to make sure that the employee has the option to opt into it, right? They
Mhm.
have to agree to either not be paid or to be paid a lesser amount than what is currently required. And of course, some of the critics are really concerned that this is just a way around a constitutional amendment that was passed by our voters. So we're monitoring that as it comes. Certainly, as like I said, an employer, a district could be concerned about that and also as we're preparing those students to graduate and go off into
Mhm.
um, the workforce. So then also thinking about some just administrative procedures and policy at the state level, some potential big impacts for us across the board is in Senate Bill 108, and it does have a House companion that looks at the rulemaking process for state agencies. And our state is trying to find those efficiencies that we're hearing about from the federal level as
Mhm.
well and really, one of the ways that this bill could make an impact is that it would require agencies to submit their proposed rule language when it's announced that the rule is going under development. So, any of you that have been a FASA member for a while know that we are constantly trying to track rulemaking under the Department of Education. And sometimes the language is available ahead of time and sometimes it's not. So, we are constantly trying to make sure that we know and we can be prepared for what that language looks like. This bill would require it not just for the DOE, but for all agencies across the board. And it talks about the timelines of when those things have to be noticed, but it's something we're following for sure.
And some other developments here, just politically in Tallahassee, that aren't necessarily education related, but will absolutely have an impact on just kind of the political environment. I think we mentioned last week that the Speaker of the House, in his opening remarks, had noted that there was a study that was conducted by the Office of Insurance Regulation a number of years ago that was never released to the public or to the legislature. This came out due to an investigation, I think, by the Tampa Bay Times, and this was he said that the House was going to then have hearings to look into this matter. And sure enough, that started this week on Friday. The House committee had their first meeting surrounding this issue. They actually it had the former head of the Office of Insurance of Regulation as well as the current head of that department, and they were put under oath, which is not normal for our typical committees. It certainly felt different having that kind of environment. Members had questions about the study itself, why it was not released, what it said. Because of course we know property insurance is a major issue in this state, and people are feeling it, and school districts are not alone. Are not. We also have that issue because we pay property
Yeah.
insurance too. So we're going to keep following that. They indicated after the meeting that there would be more meetings to come, so we'll continue to watch that issue. And we had a lot going on, obviously, here in Tallahassee last week, but you all did too. And you were up in DC with some of our members. Can you talk about your trip?
Yeah, absolutely. So, myself and 6 of our FAFSA board members were able to go and meet with some of our congressional leaders and staff. We ended up with 10 meetings, which is about a third of all of our Florida delegation, including our 28 congressional House members and 2 senators. So, it was a really successful trip. Tuesday, last week, we met with Congressman Bean and Congresswoman Kamak and Senator Scott's legislative staff. And then Wednesday brought meetings with Congressman Donalds and staff from Congressman Frost, Dunn, Moskowitz, Stubbe, Diaz-Balart, and Soto's offices.
Wow.
So it was definitely a memorable moment and an opportunity to share that federal platform and making sure that our funding for students that comes from the federal level stays intact
Mhm,
despite what happens with the US DOE.
mhm,
And I will tell you that, of course, the town was very much a flutter
mhm,
about the changes to the US DOE. Many of our congressional contacts in our meetings, they really tried to reassure us that any dismantling completely of the USD will take congressional approval because it's in their statutes.
mhm,
And so they are trying to figure out um, how this is all going to work. There's
mhm,
a lot of talk around block grants, which means holding those title funds and IDEA funds in whole and just delivering the full amount to the states and letting them manage those funds as appropriate. One thing our team was really consistent about is talking about the 1.5 million students in Florida that rely on Title I funding for our schools, which
mhm,
is about half of all students in the state of Florida. And then included as well is 288,000 students that rely on the IDEA funding.
mhm,
And many of our leaders across the board want to make sure that we are finding supports and funding supports for our most vulnerable populations. Um, the 2025 funding has remained the same. So we are not anticipating any cuts through fiscal year 2025. They are starting to think about what 26 will look like, and that's where we're going to see even more of the Doge efficiencies come into play
mhm.
and how those things are budgeted. And definitely those external grants beyond Title One, 2, 4, and So I will tell you that most of our counterparts in a lot of other states are even more concerned about
Mm,
dissolving of USDOE because they don't have the state DOE strength
mhm.
that Florida has necessarily. And so they're really concerned about how their USDOE will handle that.
That makes total sense that there's that concern, and I know even legislators here will be watching what happens at the federal level to see if any action they need to take or if there are any changes that we need to make here to align with that. So we'll certainly keep a look at that. And it sounds like it was a great trip.
It really was a great trip all around.
That's awesome. This coming week, we've got another busy week on tap. We expect that the Senate's rural initiative, that is one of the priorities for the Senate president, that provides a lot of incentives, both economic and policy incentives to help our rural communities. We expect that'll be heard on the floor during one of their floor sessions. The House is actually slated to have a floor session this week. We don't know what may be on there, but we shall see. We are at the point of session where we don't get all the agendas with as much notice as we do during committee week. So some of these things we'll find out as the week progresses. But there's going to be lots of committee meetings. We expect that school start times and the dereg bill will be heard in their final committees. We just expect a lot of activity this week.
Absolutely. And so I would encourage everyone to still go to the FAFSA website, look at our advocacy center, um, track those bills, but also watch the Friday Facts and the News Tracker. There's
Mhm.
lots of stories that are coming out every day about various policies and what's been moving. That is really our update for this week. Make sure that you are following the FAFSA Leadership Lounge on whatever podcasting
Mhm.
station that you find so that you'll be notified when new episodes are posted each week. And we look forward to sharing more updates with you. So stay tuned.